All right, guys. This is a topic that I was thinking about today, and I think I'm a good candidate to talk about this topic because the first inebriated, kind of mind altering substance I ever dealt with was marijuana. I had never done alcohol, never tried anything up until 27 years old. And I decided I wanted to get into psychedelics a little bit or experiment and kind of experience what people were talking about. Um, I've been listening to podcasts and they were just talking about, the extreme psychedelics, DMT, obviously, and it got me interested. I started with weed. My girlfriend at the time smoked pot. Um, since then, I've experienced some stuff and I've talked to some people who've experienced some stuff. I know that people describe weed as possibly making you trip. I know a lot of you have heard that, when you eat it, it's nine times, potentially 7 to 9 times more psychedelic once it processes in the liver and it changes the chemistry, I guess, of it. I don't forget the exact compound, but regardless, it's a more psychedelic experience. But it's not an easy thing to describe. Like all things psychedelic, it's very difficult to put your finger on. I'm going to describe in a few stages to how psychedelic weed is. So off the bat, as somebody who had never experienced anything, being stoned in general, like enough to feel it, but not what you would consider actually tripping, which is what most people do. Most people don't trip when they smoke weed. But early on, you can be pretty damn sensitive to it, which I will get to. But off the bat, the lower level sides of the psychedelic spectrum, you will hear music in a way. If what I would compare is music sounds so different than it did prior. So for me, I'm just going to probably do this through an anecdotal lens as far as you will experience this. I don't know what you specifically will experience, but when I was listening to music, I would notice that I would hear depth. I would love listening to music in my car stereo because I would kind of feel like you're not just hearing left and right. You'd hear things like coming from lower and higher and slightly to the left, slightly to the right. And you're really isolating all the parts of the song. And I had never heard music like that before. And the way you really pick up lines or things linger, or you notice parts of songs that you've never noticed before. I was listening to music that I'd listened to my whole life, music I had memorized, and I was understanding it in a totally different way, and I was thinking about it and considering it. Um, I had never experienced anything like that. Hands down, music was the most obvious one initially. Um, on top of that, eating food, I noticed food tasted different. Not to the extent of where it was. I don't know if that's a psychedelic trait or not. I mean, I guess in a sense it is, literally. But yeah. So that's kind of like the entry stage music. The way you consider things is slightly psychedelic. Just like I was saying, I was considering things about it and processing words. I didn't have that in every thing I got into. Like it was very hard for me to watch movies, watch TV. I didn't get caught up and wrapped up in a way that my mind was working in an enhanced state. Activities and stuff. I don't know if it feels full on psychedelic. I do MMA related stuff and I'm a strength and conditioning coach. And I would say it in the moment when you are doing something like, if you're rolling around doing jujitsu or something or sparring or hitting mitts, there's a primal state, especially when you're not really needing to think about what you're doing specifically. So if you're not doing a drill and you're just doing your sport, there is a part of you that gets into a flow state much easier in a much different way than you would without it. That was something I noticed early on. These are all minor psychedelic things. Another one is color. Colors. This is when it starts to get a little bit more like edibles might take you to this level. Excuse my dog. He's going to be obnoxious in a lot of these videos, I'm sure, but I'll leave him in. Colors. So, you definitely notice colors look differently, the edges of things. This is more, for me, I noticed this on strong weed and like weed that's not strong won't get me there, even if I go as hard as I can. really, really good weeds or really strong weeds, maybe not good, but I'll notice colors and the edges of things, especially edibles. So this is the part that edibles kind of make me when if I'm driving or something and I see like the edges of trees, it really makes me see it in a way where like the size of the tree stands out, the way it's kind of like dropping down. I don't know. I kind of feel like I'm in like Jurassic Park or something, just like driving down the road with big trees around and the edges of them. And you see things. I don't know if it's better. I don't know if like I had an eye test, but you have a way of focusing on the edges that is distinctly relates to other psychedelic experiences for me. Now let's get to the really fun stuff, or fun in air quotes. I'll just tell two experiences. Yes, obviously people can trip on weed. If you don't know that at all, it's very, go down that rabbit hole a little bit more. Like I don't feel like recounting all the different ways other people have had it happen. There's a funny story of cops who stole edibles. They ate it. I think if you Google this, you'll be able to find it. They ate the edibles and then they called 911 because they thought they were dying. So these cops stole these edibles and ate them and thought they were dying. So I'm just going to tell two personal experiences from other people. I have heard specifically, one person said they felt like they were like a gargoyle or something weird, like I don't know what, but he said he felt like he was this stone thing and his mind was running and like he felt like he was a gargoyle. So that's a very abstract thing to try and understand when somebody says that, but that's the most I could get out of him. So that's just something that somebody else has told me personally that I thought was kind of weird. But for me, if I'm very, very stoned going to bed, I will get things that remind me of tripping. But the second you realize it's there, it's kind of hard to keep it going or stay focused on it. But I remember one time I was staring at what looked like the base of a tree and trunks. I mean, the roots. I could just see like the root system, and the root system was turning into scorpions and they were just kind of scurrying around below the tree. And then I realized I was like lying in my bed and my eyes were closed. I was trying to go to sleep, and it was getting very bright colors. And I was thinking to myself, like, this is happening. I'm not really asleep yet, but I felt like if I kept going towards the trip or the experience, it would kind of turn into a dream or turn into being asleep. And since then, I've kind of thought that oftentimes if I'm pretty stoned, falling asleep reminds me, like the come up to actually sleeping, if you want to call it that. It works in our terms, I guess. It reminds me of trips that are there, but you can't really focus on them too much or else you'll just kind of come out of it very easily. So not like a full blown closed eye visual trip. And that's something that weed has that the others do not. It's hard to put your finger on what you're looking at too much, but that was a specific one. Now let's get a little bit wilder. The first time I ever really smoked pot. So I had this bowl and I didn't really know how to hit it. And I was like, I didn't even know how to use the carb. So I did it a couple times like that. My third time was with my girlfriend and we used her bong. And I did 5 bong rips until I was coughing. And about 20 minutes later, maybe 15 minutes later, we were downstairs going to make strawberry shortcakes. We were going to watch TV and play video games. And we came back upstairs. Or no, I'm sorry. We were downstairs and I started to feel it and I started to laugh. And keep in mind, I had never drank to this point. My weed experiences were really, I felt it a little, but I wasn't really even stoned. Definitely wasn't as stoned as I got this night. So I start laughing hysterically. I fall to the floor kind of. I can't keep my shit together. I keep trying to tell her, I can't keep my shit together to save my life. But it keeps repeating in my head. Then I feel like I'm watching like a sitcom of a show and it's Fred Sanford or something. And he's like, I can't keep my shit together to save my life. And then it's like, I'm talking in this accent and I'm thinking of this TV show and I'm like, man, that sounds like a line in a show. And then I'm like, it can't be in a TV. Connor, stop. It can't be in a TV show. Come here, buddy. It can't be in a TV show. He says shit. Like, so I have this running dialogue. I can remember it like it was yesterday. And then racing thoughts in the front of my head. I would like kind of see like swirls and like kind of black and white, hypercolor, like when you press your eyelids, that kind of stuff. Except it was like kind of like tunneling and time. This is another very psychedelic aspect. I would look at the clock or something, and then I would have my mind would just drift off, and it felt like my mind drifted off forever, forever. And then I would come back and it would pick up right where I left off. And that was very insane. And that is very psychedelic. And yeah, I had that happen like probably 10 to 12 times early on experimenting with weed. Just, I was sensitive to the time thing. I would be in a mid conversation like this right here, but there would be a moment where my mind would have drifted off mid sentence for what felt like, I mean, at least a few minutes, but really longer than that. Like my mind was somewhere else. And then I would come back, finish the sentence, look at everyone I'm talking to and be like, did I just make sense? Like, did I just tell you guys something that remotely made sense? Like, I just feel like all I did was finish that up. Like my mind would just get lost. Can't even follow a thought. And yeah, the sense of time thing, that was an aside to another experience, but yeah, that would happen all the time. So back to this, I mean, it got a little overwhelming. The front of my forehead hurt so hard from like racing thoughts and racing visions. It was like visual, but you just can't even think of it because you're so in the moment. You can't even reflect on what just happened. You're just looking at whatever's there, and then you can barely remember it. And this lasted, I think, say it lasted for a good 6 real hours. Felt like an eternity. Was in some ways the most I've ever tripped in my life, as far as your inability to figure out what's happening, the duration, just the confusion. And another weed experience was, again, in some way, I would say my most confusing, disoriented psychedelic experience. I had this tincture I was making, and the oil was separating from the alcohol. It was an alcohol tincture, and I was seeing how dense it was because I knew I reduced the alcohol, so I thought it would be, way stronger. I tried it. It wasn't stronger. So I'm like, what the hell happened? Maybe like there's not enough alcohol in here. Maybe your body's not processing it. Well, what was happening was at a certain density or certain like milligrams per milliliter of alcohol, the oil starts to fall out and separate. So when I was trying it at first, I guess I didn't get any of that black oil that had separated. So this next time I'm like, well, I didn't barely even felt that. I'm going to up it 4 times. And I pulled up that goop, which is essentially Rick Simpson oil. I woke up a couple hours later and I thought I was dying. I thought I was going to stop breathing. I kept having to remind myself to breathe. It was unreal. And I called my girlfriend at the time. I'm like, I don't know what to do. Like, I feel like I'm going to stop breathing. I think I'm just really stoned, but like, maybe I'm having a panic attack. Maybe I'm having a heart attack. Like, sure, weed's not going to kill me, but if I'm reacting this way to it, I mean, of all times to have a heart attack, I think it would be this fucking moment right here. Is the way I felt. So even though I kind of realistically knew I was just really stoned, part of me was like, but you still might be able to die, right? Like if it freaks you out that much or if it fucks up your headspace. So that's where I was at. It was uncomfortable. And that was like the hardest ever. Long story short about weed, guys. Yes, it is psychedelic. It actually, in some ways, feels more or like stronger in its own way. I've had more experiences than that, that I don't like it, to be honest. Like the thought of putting myself through that. I mean, maybe it doesn't actually compare to a bad mushroom trip or a bad acid trip or something, but it's really tough to go through. And especially like a too much edible. I don't think that weed is the easiest one to experiment. I think it's more for experienced strippers, or at least very experienced potheads. People who really, if you're going down the route of trying to experiment with large amounts of edibles, or just like you've never gone to town on a bong and you've always just been like, yeah, I take a couple puffs here, and you want to know, or you're curious if you could actually trip, or you never have tripped, it's very possible. It's very disorienting, and I don't think many people would enjoy it that much. Usually it's a bad time, or it's kind of, it's, if you plan to do it, you might have a better time than when you accidentally do it. So I guess that's a factor. I've never really planned. The times I've planned to do a lot of edible, it's never turned out too poorly. But the times it kind of catches you off guard, it's always been a little bit much. I guess that about covers it with weed for me and this video. So maybe those anecdotes kind of gave you a little bit of perspective. In the earlier stages, we're looking at colors are a little different. You hear music differently. You have a slightly different creative side to you, a slightly different way of replying. You laugh at things slightly different. This is the early stages of things that are kind of psychedelic. And psychedelic is almost like the headspaces you could never tap into sober. So like non-psychedelic headspaces you can kind of relate to from sober reality. So I think these are things that you can only understand through experience. I mean, you can kind of imagine, but it's even hard for me to imagine right now, right? Because I'm not hearing things that way. I'm not seeing things that way. I can imagine being wound up. I don't have to do cocaine to imagine. Now, there are nuances of doing it that but in general, I think if you're trying to isolate the psychedelic side of it, in a way, it's the things that you can really only understand through experience. It's the heightened senses, the heightened awareness, obviously visual things. You could look for maybe getting closed eye visuals, kind of like swirls, not the most bright and obvious and distinct, but it might compare to closed eye visuals on a small amount of acid or a couple grams of mushrooms. And then full bore, I think I'm dying. I'm so in the moment. I can't even follow my own thought. That was another story I wanted to tell. One time I smoked a lot on 420 with some friends. We had a party and there was like wax in there. There was all kinds of stuff. And we were just ripping this bong. And I got to the point where I couldn't follow a thought because I was so in the moment. I figured out, I could actually experience what it felt like to be in the moment. Not figuratively, literally. I was stuck in the moment so much that I couldn't remember anything before what was happening in that fucking moment. It was so hard. I mean, you knew the basics. Like, I guess I didn't forget I was me. It's like I'm waking up like, who am I? Oh, who am I? Oh, who am I? But in a way, I kept having to you'll catch yourself having to remind yourself the same thing over and over. Like one time I had an edible creeping up. I noticed probably 20 times I was reminding myself, man, I need to stop hitting that weed. I need to stop hitting that weed. And then I kept telling myself, oh, I'm not hitting weed. This edible's kicking in hard. So yes, you can trip on, can I get your face up in here? You want to get up? Say hi? Come up here. Come up here. Say hi. Say hi to the camera. Yes. Don't lick me. Just smile and be cute. This is my dog, Connor. It's his first time in the video. Okay, guys. Yes, weed can make you trip. He may or may not know a little bit about that.